everyone, I'm Annie, and I don't read. Before 2024, I was part of that group that hasn't really read a book for fun since middle school. So this year, I decided that I was going to start reading, and I'm here to document and bring you all along for my reading adventures. Hey everyone! So I might have gone a little crazy with the reading this month, but I have my Starbucks coffee, I have some of the books I read behind there, and I have my notes on the side, so let's get it! The first book I read this month that started this whole thing was None of This Is True by Jewell. I honestly don't think I could have started this off with a better book. This was so fast-paced, super suspenseful right from the start, and that just made it so easy to just fly right through this book. And I think it's partially the reason why I ended up reading so many books this month, because I thoroughly enjoyed this one. But really, like right from the start, it's a very mundane setting, as in it's just this woman who decides she wants to go to a restaurant or bar that she doesn't normally go to. And there she meets her birthday twin, who is this podcaster who just happens to have the same birthday and is turning the same age as her, right? But even from this like very normal mundane setting, in the back from how the story's told, you just feel like there's something's wrong, like something is not right, and you don't know what it is. But then as the book keeps going, that feeling of like something is wrong just continues to grow as little things are revealed, and then occasionally something big is revealed, and then you're like, okay, this kind of explains that feeling, but then there are still so many things unanswered, and then so that bad feeling and suspense just keeps going until basically like the end of the book. So I'll say I thoroughly enjoyed this book. That being said though, what's kind of funny is that I feel like I enjoyed it while I was reading it much more than after I finished it and like looked back on it. After I was finished with it and looking back on it, I was thinking like, was this actually a good book? Did I actually like this? But I'll say like I flew through this book and I feel like I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I give this an 8.3 out of 10. The second book I read this month was The Mysterious Benedict Society. I actually got this from my parents' place in a random cabinet when I was like so bored and I had like finished None of This Is True and there was nothing else to read. And so I just like randomly picked this up. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was a nice like YA fiction adventure book. I don't want to give too much away, but it's sort of like one of those, you know, gifted children, like team of kids solving mysteries with some adventure in them. I wouldn't say it's mystery though. I would say it's definitely more YA fiction adventure. If I can relate it to anything, for all of my anime fans out there, if any of you guys have seen Promised Neverland, I feel like this is a PG version of Promised Neverland. But honestly, it's kind of a stretch because really the only things that are similar is that it's like a team of kids trying to figure out what's going on in this institution of kids. But yes, 7.4 out of 10. Yeah. The third book I read this month was actually a book I got from a little free library in the neighborhood, and I learned about little free libraries in this process, but it's a series of unfortunate events. The very first one, The Bad Beginning, I watched this movie, the movie for this, a long time ago, and I was so surprised that I just found this in a little free library. Also, it's technically a children's book, so there's that too. I honestly don't have too much to say about it, because it is technically a children's book, but it's essentially about these three orphans, or three children who are told that their parents died in a fire and they have to go live with their Count Olaf, who is terrible. And that is all I'm going to say. I gave this a 6.4 out of 10. Oh, and I probably will try to read the rest of the series, because I do think it's an interesting premise, and I do remember some parts of the movie were pretty fun too, but I probably won't go out of my way to get it yet. It might be something a little bit later on. Alrighty. The fourth book I read this month was The Course of Love by Alain de Botton. I'm sorry if I am not pronouncing that correctly at all.
Alain de Botton.
This is kind of hard to review because this is basically what I call a modern philosophy book. And I've actually read one other book by him a long time ago, which was his first book, which was called On Love. And a very similar premise, but basically what it is that it's just this very normal story of like a relationship. It's like, you know, when a person meets another person, what happens throughout a relationship, they get married, they have kids, if there's any adultery, if they have a divorce, all of that stuff. And it's just about this very normal relationship. But then throughout the entire novel, there's these snippets of basically like philosophical snippets, philosophical verbiage. I don't even know what to call it. This is what happens when I don't read very much. But for instance, one of the things that they talk about that I think is something that's more widely known or talked about nowadays is that when we look for a partner, we don't always look for the person who is the best for us or the person who suits our personality the best or the one who treats us the best. We look for familiarity, and this is particularly from our childhood. And so if our childhood is comprised of times of a lot of stress or of abuse or things like that, it's very likely that in our adulthood, we'll subconsciously look for the same things in our partners because it's familiar. So that's one of like example snippets. There's a lot of other ones that I think are pretty enlightening too, but I do recommend this for anyone who's interested or likes this type of modern philosophy. I happen to like it quite a bit, so I rated this a 7.4 out of 10. Now we're gonna get into all of the books that I do not own, that I got from the library. That's where I've been reading most of my books now. But the next one is The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry. This was a very heartwarming, sweet book. It feels a lot like, if anyone has watched that Netflix movie, A Man Called Otto, or A Man Called Odo, something like that. But it basically tells the story of this man who is just, down in his luck and is just having the worst time. His wife has recently passed away, something of his that was a prized possession got stolen, but then something comes into his life and it just changes his life entirely. And ultimately, I felt like this was just a very nice, heartwarming book. It's a sweet read. And so I gave this one, oh shit, I gave this one a 7.8 out of 10. Damn. I forgot. But yeah, I gave this one a 7.8 out of 10. Next book I'm so excited for. Okay, the next book I read this month, which was also my favorite book of this month and my most highly rated book of this month, is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. Well, I could go on and on about this book, but I will not. I have everyone I've talked to recently, I've told about this book. But to summarize it, it's about this family who their eldest daughter has died, right? This is the first thing that you learn from the back of the book. But what the book is really about is, and I'm not gonna give too many spoilers here, or I'll try to keep the spoilers down to a minimum, is about this family. They are interracial, and so the wife is Caucasian and the husband is Chinese. And they have their own life experiences and life regrets in their life that they end up applying pressures onto their children because they don't want them to have the same regrets in life. And so for me, this was extremely relatable. Many, I think, Asian American children or even parents can definitely relate to this book, because if you've ever, and regardless of Asian American or not, or really anyone, if you are a teenager, young adult, child who has ever felt the need to like rise up to parents' expectations or feel like your parents have had certain expectations of you, I think you can relate to this book. And I think if you are a parent who has regrets in life or realizes that they apply certain pressures onto their children or certain expectations onto their children because of like X, Y, and Z, I think you can relate to this book. Ultimately, this was my very first 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. I gave this book an 8.8 out of 10. Highly recommend. The next book I read this month was The Plot by Hanff Korelitz. I am so sorry if I just ruin all of these author names. But yeah, very... So I'll just come right out and say this was my least favorite book of this month. This one was rough. As I was going through my notes before I just like started recording just now, I just let out a big sigh. I was like, and I apologize for anyone who did enjoy this book, because I know there are definitely a lot of people out there who did, but I could not. For me, so first, quick plot. There is an author, main character is an author, who is also kind of down on his luck. He wrote something that won like a small prize back in the day, but then nowadays he's kind of like a not very successful author, and he gets a potential opportunity to write this amazing book, and so he does that. Honestly, you probably could have gotten a better summary from the back of the book. I'm sorry. Regardless, I will tell you the reasons I did not like this book. And the first reason is because I hated this main character. This main character, to me, he was just too woe is me. It's like, oh, my life, so hard. And I feel like probably if you're a writer or if you're anywhere in the literary space, you could probably relate to his struggles more and would like the book more than I did. This was actually one of the main things that really made it hard for me to get through this book, because I just thought this is the kind of guy who will never be successful in life. He will always like basically self-destruct, or even if he was successful of his own accord, would like do something or cause something that would just like, he would just fail in the end. But that being said, the fact that I can comment so much on this guy's character means that I think he is a pretty like well-developed and like very clear person, like a very well-developed character. I just didn't like him. The other reason why I didn't like this book is because it's really slow. It is really slow. It, like, after I finished it, the way that I described it to my friends was that you read the first 250 pages to get to the last 50 pages, and then even then after that, you realize you read the first 300 pages to just get to the last 15 pages. But yeah, it probably doesn't deserve this rating, but I gave it a 5.6 out of 10. Apologies. The next book I read this month was the very first romance book I think I have ever read and like finished. And this has also kind of made me realize this whole process that I am not a romance girly, guys. I don't like romance books. But that being said, this one was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. Now, I know that name gives like very mixed reactions. Some people love Colleen Hoover books, some people really do not. I don't know. I've never read any other Colleen Hoover book. I don't know anything about her, but I thought this book was not bad. Generally, like better than I thought it would be. I wasn't the biggest fan of the beginning because it was that stereotypical romance start where it's like, oh, they're on a rooftop and they they're both kind of, you know, upset because of something, and then they see each other and it's like, oh, sparks, or oh, he's hot, oh, like love at first sight kind of thing, right? Which I'm not super into. But the reason why I liked this book more than I thought I did was because of all of the non-romantic parts. There is one main theme that I don't want to mention here, but there is like a potential trigger warning in the book, but I think that she went through that theme pretty well. And there was actually one part that I cried in this book at the very end, and so that gave it plus points too. But overall, I gave this a 7.4 out of 10. I probably will not read the second book though. Next up is Every Heart a Doorway, and this is the first book of the Wayward Children series, which is a series of novellas. And this was actually a recommendation by a colleague who is very into fantasy sci-fi books. And what the Wayward Children series is about is basically this house that houses a lot of wayward children. And so what wayward children are basically kids that had found a portal to another world at some point in like their childhood or teenage years. And they came back from that world and they're like desperately trying to go back. They can't move on, they don't want to move on, but they want to go back because that is their real home. The main idea is that it's very hard for these children to actually go back to that world that they want to go to. And every child like has different worlds too. Some people can go to the same world. And so the house is meant to help them try and move on. This first book was very different from what I thought it would be. And honestly, this first book could have been like a 300 to 500 page book by itself, but it was less than 200 pages. And so because of that, there were a lot of parts that felt quite rushed. And I think I ended up giving it a higher score than maybe it deserves, I don't know. But the reason why is because I really liked the world building and the premise of the series. And so I gave this an 8 out of 10, still a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads, and I am planning on reading the rest of the series. But yeah, when I think about the book itself, I think the book itself is just okay. But when I think about the world, and I guess like about the children and kind of the different kind of worlds that they face, I don't know, it makes my heart feel very full for some reason, or it just like gives a very like mystical feeling. I can't really explain it, but yeah, I really liked it. Next book, and the second 5-star out of 5 on Goodreads that I have rated so far, and that is Red Rising. Yep. I saw this on so many like booktube things and on recommendations, and I'm just like, you know, I haven't really read sci-fi very much, but I finally picked this up and I got it and it was great. But this is a very different 5-star compared to Everything I Never Told You. Like, that is a book that after I finished reading it, I was like, I love this book. This is a book that while I was reading it, I felt like I could like feel a movie playing in my head. Like I could picture everything that was happening as I was just like reading through the pages. And this was particularly starting from the second half, but that is actually why I gave it a 5-star. That being said, I think the plot is very, I don't know if popular is the right word. I don't think the plot is anything like too original, but I do like the character development, and there were some parts. Something I realized in like so far the 5-star books that I've had, which is really only 2, is that there are some parts that'll make me just go, that'll just like let out a big sigh, like all the tension just like releases, but it's like for not always for like a good reason, right? But okay, now to actually get onto the summary. There's this guy who lives in a world on Mars, and he is part of the Red District, or he is a Red, and his job is to make civilization habitable for humans. Yeah, and then let's just say that he needs to like overthrow the government. Let's just go with that. I think a lot of people say this is similar to Hunger Games, but I don't agree. I think it's actually quite different from Hunger Games. That being said, I haven't read Hunger Games since middle school, so I can't totally remember all of it. I think this is definitely more adult. And then also, this book took me the longest to read this month, despite not being like the longest book, because I think the writing and the language in this book, like I had to really pay attention to everything I was reading in order to like make sure I understood everything. So it definitely took a little bit more like brain power than some of the other books that I read this month, but ultimately I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and I gave this a 8.6 out of 10. Whoop. Finally to the end. Finally drinking some coffee. Actually, I had a few sips in between because I was going. But the last book I read this month was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And I also thoroughly enjoyed this one. I feel like this one was really like YA fiction mystery done right. Like it was simple enough to read for the young adult audience, but then it was also still engaging enough, and it had a great pace. Like it was such a nice, consistent, like not too slow, not too fast pace, that it was still engaging enough for our, you know, the older adult audience. But summary wise, let's get that out of the way. Basically, 5 years ago, there was a murder of a high school girl, and the boyfriend, Sal Sin, was decided to be the murderer. But a girl today basically is using her capstone project to try and do a deep dive into this case 5 years ago, because she believes that it wasn't him. Really just off of the basis that like this guy was like such a nice guy and such a like good person towards her and towards so many people, that she's like, there's no way I'm gonna like try and do my capstone project on this. And then so as she does that and, you know, looks into news articles, gets interviews, all of that stuff, she finds out some interesting answers, and that's all I'll say. But another thing that I thought was really great about this book is how the chapters are formatted. There are some chapters that are your normal, you know, book chapters, and then there are other ones that are like a transcript of her interview that she did, or a project piece of like the capstone project that she's doing, or like a record of that. And so I think that really helped break up the story, or like tell different parts of the story too. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it an 8 out of 10, and I am planning on reading the rest of the series. Same thing for Red Rising too. I am planning on reading the rest of that series eventually. And yeah, those were all of the books I read this month. It's kind of crazy looking at the list right now that I have on my laptop on the side. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought of these books. If you guys have wildly different opinions than me, and if you guys have any recommendations. I am literally taking recommendations from everyone because I am going through my TBR way too quickly. So yes, but thank you guys, and I will see you next month.